Welcome back to our podcast on the assessment of behavior, this particular part regarding projective testing, the use of the instruments. Instruments and procedures through which we figuratively crack open the skull, take a look inside at these disturbed emotions, try to figure out how they reached that point. I like this particular image, which shows us how the surface self, the part that we recognize, the part that others see, oftentimes has underlying influences. How do we understand those underlying influences? Perhaps through the use of incomplete sentences. I think guys, complete that sentence. I think girls, how would you finish that up? What makes me sad is my mother was the type, if I could only, people I know, I've got a little extra money in my pocketbook, I'll lend Dr. Mac. Sometimes with this projective testing, we wonder whether we're finding out more about the psychologist than we are the kid. Let's look at the granddaddy of all projective tests, the Rorschach, the ink blot test. Herman Rorschach developed this test back in 1921. There are 5 ink blots in black ink on white paper. 2 have black and red ink on white paper, and 3 are multicolored, making up the group of 10. The scores that a person receives depend on many aspects, not just the content of the answer, but whether that answer was a popular one or a rather novel and unusual response. Whether the color was involved in the answer, whether the person noticed the details. There's a lot involved that the investigator, the administrator, the test giver considers. And then there are these highfalutin formulas for calculating a profile that is then compared against populations of people who had been diagnosed with disorders and matching up this particular person's profile with a common profile found in other types of emotional disorders. Let's take, oh, good gracious, it scared me. Somebody give me a hug. This is one of the plates that is offered up for someone to describe, tell a story about, as we had talked about before. That's a little bit more pleasant, but again, we're speaking from my mind. What are you seeing? What do you see here? What's happening right now? Tell a story about it. Describe it. Do you see a bat? Or a bird? Or a butterfly? Those are some of the common responses to this plate. Do you see something, though, that's quite different from what other people see? Maybe you see it differently because of what's going on in your inner cognitive emotional structure. Yeah, what is seen depends on who sees it. We find out a lot about you by the answers you give. High five. Well, that's what I see. And taking off on that big Harley hog. I can't tell you what I'm thinking here. It's not fit for podcasts. So, are we finding out more about the person or the psychologist? Yes. Let's look at another test called the Thematic Apperception Test, or the TAT, for people 10 years old and older. The examiner shows the individual some story cards. There are 31 total, but the usual number selected is between about 10 and 14, sometimes up to about 20 cards. These original 31 cards used to be divided into 3 categories. one for use with men only, one for use with women only, and some for use with subjects of either sex. But recently, practice has moved away from using separate sets of cards for the genders. The person is then instructed to tell a story about the picture on each card. Specific instructions to include describing what's happening in the picture. What led up to that event? What are the people in that picture feeling? And what was the outcome of the story? In addition to assessing the content of the stories that the person is speaking, the examiner also evaluates the person's manner, their vocal tone, their posture, any hesitations, any other indicators or signs of an emotional response to this particular story picture. For example, if someone is made anxious by a certain picture, they might try to cover that anxiety by commenting on the artistic style of the image, or saying that, oh, I don't really like this picture. Different ways of avoiding telling a story about it because of the anxious feelings that come up, and perhaps the superego telling this person, you shouldn't tell others what you're feeling. This is forbidden stuff. So imagine that you are in a thematic apperception test situation. You're presented with this particular image, or maybe that one. What do you notice? What's happening here? Did you see all the details and include them in your story, or just particular ones? Because the use of human figures in human situations may bring up too much anxiety, may be too related to life, perhaps the emotions and the feelings and the responses that are welling up inside are not allowed out because the person who is taking the test might feel they are revealing too much of themselves. In that case, it's time for animalia. We use animals versus people, figuring that talking about animals in cartoon-like situations might be less anxiety-provoking. Perhaps the defenses will lower themselves so one's true feelings and emotions and perceptions can surface. Typically intended for use with what group of people? Yeah, kids. Take a look at this one. What do you notice here? What catches your attention first? What catches your attention second? What then do you notice? We might ask you questions after your initial description and story. What is the young monkey hearing? What's being said between the tea drinkers in the background? What's the significance of the photo on the wall? Probably pulling out feelings of family honor, ancestry, family reputation. Here we have a small dog over the lap of a larger one. The larger dog seems to have its hand and arm raised, but is that larger dog checking a boo-boo? Pulling a burr off of the fur? Preparing to spank? There is my poor representation of a toilet to the right side of the image. It didn't come out in the copy, but there would be a toilet there. Aha! Toilet training, perhaps? Superego? Right versus wrong as society sees it? Let's look a little deeper into the children's apperception test, this use of animal figures as in the two plates we've just seen. The children's apperception test, or the CAT, believed to be useful for describing personality or aspects of emotional disturbance in kids ages 3 to 10 years. We're going to end part 2 at this point. We'll return to the CAT test. And additionally, we'll also look at the EAT test as we finish up the administration of projective testing in part 3.